Welcome, everyone, to the State of Gerotherapeutics Next-Gen Interventions to Extend Healthy Living, brought to you by the American Federation for Aging Research and the Academy for Health and Lifespan Research. A few housekeeping items. Due to the large number of folks who are here today, the attendee lines are muted to ensure good sound quality. If you have a question, please enter it in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and those questions will be addressed later in the program, time permitting. And indeed, we will be recording this webinar, and we'll be providing a copy of the recording for folks who have attended here or even signed up for the webinar today. So to get the program started for the State of Gerotherapeutics, Next-Gen Interventions to Extend Healthy Living, we have two hosts. The first, the American Federation for Aging Research, which is dedicated to advancing and supporting healthy aging through biomedical research. AFAR is the talent incubator for the field and has provided $212 million to almost 4,500 investigators at research institutions around the country. We also are hosted by the the Academy for Health and Lifespan Research, which is, if AFAR is the talent incubator, the Academy is the connector and is composed of the world's leading scientists in aging biology and focused on advancing the promise of geroscience and creating these connections that among scientists, policymakers, physicians, industry leaders, and others to accelerate innovation and to make access to longevity and longevity advancements for everyone in our society. We are very pleased today to have Dr. Dana Smith from the New York Times to serve as our moderator. Dana is the reporter covering personal health and particularly aging and brain health. If we have a talent incubator in AFAR and a connector in the Academy, Dana is a translator, and her reporting often takes the form of helping readers understand what the latest research is all about and what the recommendations mean for regular folks like us, and then explaining about the evidence and risks involved with some of those latest health trends. We have a number of panelists that we're pleased to have with us today. The first is Dr. Nir Barzilai, who is the Ingeborg and Ira Leon Rennert Chair in Aging Research and Director of the Institute for Aging Research at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. As you can see, is also the president of the Academy and an AFAR board member and grantee. We're really pleased to have Nir here helping to do this presentation. Our second panelist is Dr. Rafael de Cabo from the National Institute on Aging as chief of the Translational Gerontology Branch. He's also senior investigator of the Experimental Gerontology section of the National Institutes of Health. He has also been recognized by AFAR for the Irving Wright Award as an Irving Wright Award winner and is a member of the Academy as well. Dr. Sara Espinoza, who is the director for the Center for Translational Geroscience at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, an AFAR board member and also a member of the Academy. We have Dr. Kristen Fortney, who is the CEO and co-founder of BioAGE Labs and also has received support from the American Federation for Aging Research. And we have Dr. Carolina Solis-Herrera, who is the division chief and associate professor in the Division of Endocrinology at the UT Health San Antonio School of Medicine. All right. Thank you to our panel and our moderator. I will turn it back to Dana Smith to help us move into the program.
Great. Thanks so much, John. Thanks to all the audience members for tuning in, and thanks for our great panelists here. I'm really excited for the discussion that we're going to have today. Nir, I think you're going to kick us off with some slides just to kind of table set what exactly we're talking about with gerotherapeutics, where the state of the field is, and help the audience think about kind of how to place some of the panelists' answers in context. So yeah, maybe you can take us away.
Sure. I just want to say I feel a little bit like the father of the bride. I'm the president of the Academy. I also was the scientific director of AFAR and a board member. And what AFAR has done, it's given me my first grant. I think it was $40,000 that now, if I count back my life, it led to $80 million. But more important, it went from what we hoped we can do to not only a promise, but to realizing the promise. And I think that's what we're going to do now. And in the next couple of minutes, I want to say just a few things that will kind of level the playing field so all of you know what we're going to talk about. And I think the first thing on the slide, that aging as a biology, is not surprising to anyone, right? You know who's old and who's young. You actually know more than that. You know that if you look at your friends or your parents' friends, that some people are aging slower and some people are aging quicker than others, which really suggested for us who came to this field that there's something flexible about the biology, and maybe we should maybe we can do something about it. I think the other two things that are less obvious is, first of all, this biology of aging, it's what drives diseases. You know, people sometimes think that you get sick and you get old. No, you actually, this biology drives diseases. Alzheimer's is in red because you can be born with genes for Alzheimer. You might have heard of ApoE4. If you have 2 copies of this gene, you're likely to have Alzheimer when you're 60, 70, die when you're 80. But when you're born, you don't suffer from cognitive function. You don't develop Alzheimer, not when you're 1 year or 10 years or 3 or 50 years. It takes this biology of aging to get the disease out, and that's common to all the diseases. Really, aging is the major risk factor for all those diseases. And second, and more important, we know not only from animal study, but as you'll see from human studies, that aging can be targeted. And aging can be prevented in the sense we can prevent age-related disease. And we're even in the future are working on maybe stopping and maybe reversing at least parts of aging. Now, you want to go to the doctor and say, hey, you know, I don't think, I feel like cognitive decline. I feel foggy. I walk slowly, or I got a disease. So when I put here Gerotherapeutics, it's really just to define, I want treatment, right? I want treatment for me being old. And every doctor and every clinic and every longevity things that are popping us all over the place will tell you the first thing, to optimize exercise, diet, sleep, and social connectivity. And I'm saying optimize because, you know, if you didn't do 5,000 steps today, maybe you should do 7,000 steps. So in this case, optimize, and you can use technology for that, but we're not going to talk about that, okay? We're moving farther on. And I think many people think, well, the next stage is supplements. And I would just say that supplements are a problem in many ways. One is that we don't know what the bottle actually has. Second, we don't have any clinical studies, okay, on those supplements. They can claim whatever they want, but we don't know that. But even more of concern is that multi-supplements might be antagonistic, and that's a great worry in the field. What we're going to talk about more is drugs that have been approved by the FDA, so they're safe, okay? They have been used for other things, but guess what? You give them to animals, they live longer. So what does it take to decide? You know, we're going to talk about several drugs. What will it decide that something is gerotherapeutic? Well, from the preclinical development of a drug, we want to know that those drugs target the hallmarks of aging. And I'm not going to tell you what the hallmarks of aging, but those are things that go wrong with aging. And if we fix them, they actually enhance the health span and lifespan of whether it's animal or humans. The nice thing about them, they are interacted with each other. So you don't have to target all of them to get an effect. The second thing, which will be maybe relevant to a discussion that Rafa will lead later, is you want to show that if you give this drug to animals, they actually live healthier and longer. This is the preclinical side. In the clinical side, you want to see that the drug that was developed for some disease, when you give it to a group of patients and to groups of patients that they are not receiving the drug but placebo, that over a period of time, they target not only that disease, but several other diseases. And also you want to show that this drug that was developed for a certain cause, for a certain disease, targets overall mortality, not the disease-specific mortality. So I would say that if you can show really good data that really targets all of those, that really, you can have sign on each one of them, then those are gerotherapeutics, and we're going to talk about those 4 drugs in more details. So this is my initial introduction. I'll stop here. So Dana, you can take us through the rest.
Great. Thanks so much, Nir. I appreciate it. I want to kick off with just a question to the entire panel, just to kind of wet everyone's whistle a little bit. When we're talking about gerotherapeutics, what are you all excited about right now? Like, what are we going to be talking about in 5 or 10 years? Sara, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I think it's very exciting in the field because we have embarked upon several clinical trials in this space of various interventions, smaller trials, kind of phase 2 trials at this point. But I think that is very exciting because we're doing the work now. We still have a lot to learn, but I think in the future, where I hope to see is us going into larger phase 3 trials. That would be my answer.
And what about you, Kristen?
Yeah, sure. So as Nir mentioned, it's an exciting time for the field, and there already are a few approved drugs that show really a lot of promise for slowing aging more broadly. Importantly, too, the pipeline is growing. So there are some drugs now in phase 3, for example, that I'm keeping an eye on. There are FGF21 analogs. This is a target that makes mice live substantially longer. There is a CETP inhibitor as well in phase 3, which is a human centenarian gene target. And they're not in phase 3 for aging, they're in phase 3 for a particular disease, but these are mechanisms that could have that same broad potential as, metformin, GLPs, et cetera. And behind those, many more because of the additional funding and company growth that's happened, including some of the mechanisms we work on at BioAGE. So I think that we as a field need to figure out really, how to get to that broader approval as quickly as we can so the most patients can benefit.
Great. Some things that we're definitely going to touch on as we go through this discussion. Rafa, what about you? What's getting you excited these days?
I mean, I'm super excited of the amazing pipeline that we have in, ongoing. So in the 2000s, when I jumped in the field, we have one way of extending lifespan in animals. Now we have a repertoire of tools that is increasing steadily. And I think right now, for example, and we're going to talk about the GLP-1 agonist, but I think that is an ongoing experiment. I think that it's affecting so many diseases that I think that we're going to be able to, do retrospective studies and see what is the impact of manipulating to that degree energy metabolism and causing the postponement and the delay of the onset of many, many diseases and the slowdown of those diseases. So I think that in the next 5 to 10 years, I think that there's going to be a lot more information emerging of getting down to the nitty-gritty mechanisms behind the aging processes of key chronic diseases.
Carolina, what do you think? What's exciting for you right now?
Well, first of all, thank you. It's an honor to be here with all these experts. I am not an aging expert, but I'm an endocrinologist that has collaborated with Dr. Espinoza and some of her colleagues in the area of aging. My expertise is in diabetes and metabolism, and we have made some very interesting discoveries in the area of SGLT2 inhibition and decreasing of senescence. I think it's really exciting to see decrease of inflammation, oxidation medications that patients already take that do not cause sarcopenia. So I think that's really important. And also, like Kristen mentioned, the pipeline is very important. New medications that are anti-senescence, but also that promote that muscle growth, that decrease fragility, like some of Sara's studies have shown. So I think there is a very exciting times for the area of geroscience.
And Nir, we'll end with you. What are you
So,
excited about?
so I want to give just two examples that I thought will take more than 5 years, and I think I'm probably wrong or partially wrong. One of those hallmarks of aging is related to mitochondria. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and with aging, there's less number and less effective work of mitochondria, lots of other problems. And this mitochondria is actually an ancient bacteria that came into the cell and they're living in symbiosis. And I mention it just because there are several companies that are entering clinical studies where you can just infuse the mitochondria to the blood and they'll go into the cells themselves and they'll have an effective role in energy, for example. So that's not that far away. The second thing that's exciting is actually really a futuristic idea when we actually can reverse our aging totally, the whole body, which is not going to happen in the next 5 and 10 years. But there's partial reprogramming that's being done on either organs or even on, a lot of the kidneys that are harvested cannot be transplanted because it's old people and they have lots of other problems, but you could actually go and reverse their aging and make more transplants available. So those things that were even a year ago more of science fiction are science now.
Carolina, did you want to add something else?
Yes, real quick, I completely agree with Nir. Definitely, the mitochondria is so important, and we believe that, for example, SGLT2 inhibitors that increase the ketone levels are actually helping improve mitochondrial dysfunction, which is a hallmark of aging and a hallmark of diabetes. And that those ketones are actually working as a super fuel to that dysfunctional mitochondria, re-recruiting them and refueling them. And we have seen that improvement of ejection fraction in older Americans. So I think that that is also a possibility, just like we know that you can re-recruit beta cells. I think that that happens to the mitochondria. We're getting there. We'll prove it.
You've teed me up nicely for my next question, which is, a lot of the drugs that we're talking about, some of the ones that the panelists mentioned, others Nir, I know that you worked on metformin for a long time. A lot of these drugs started as medications for diabetes, metformin, GLP-1s, SGLT2s. Why is that? What's the connection between metabolic health and aging? Why do we think that, by kind of manipulating these pathways that we might be able to kind of slow down the process? Rafa, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I think that the key is that, linking metabolic health, which is what most of these drugs do, go directly to the core of the cellular and molecular mechanism of aging. We talked a second ago about mitochondria, but also they are altering, for example, the nutrient sensing pathways, the insulin signaling, the way that the glucose get captured into the cell, the mTOR pathway, that we have developed, we've been studying rapamycin as a key molecule to slow down aging through this pathway, MPK, the sirtuins. And then, you go in metabolic health, if you look through all the hallmarks of aging, it affects all of them. If you have poor metabolic health, like obesity, insulin resistant, type 2 diabetes, then you will accelerate most of the hallmarks of aging. You accelerate genomic instability because you have more free radical production. You increase the epigenetic alteration because of the nutrient excess affect chromatin modifiers. You lose proteostasis, so all the misfolding proteins get accumulating. You also affect cellular senescence that it was just mentioned a second ago. And then there is a complete alteration of the intracellular communication that occur because of these levels of high food, high levels of glucose and high levels of energy circulating. And that creates low-grade chronic inflammation that is being coded as inflammation. And then in the opposite end of that there is a clear demonstration that when you practice caloric restriction or intermittent fasting, and Carolina was mentioning the ketone bodies, they are, mountain evidence that when you reduce the number of calories or you increase the fasting times, there is a number of pathways that kicked in that most of these drugs are also tweaking. So I think that the link between absolute energy intake and outcomes of health is highly demonstrated. The same thing that the intake and the energy expenditure through exercise and activity. I think that learning how to adequately moderate intake and optimize the utilization of energy is a must do to translate interventions into the clinic. And I think most of these drugs are right at the core of how an organism senses, uptakes, keeps, and mobilizes the energy. So I think that that's, essential for the aging process.
I just want to end that to add that there are drugs like rapamycin, which didn't make the top here, that is actually antagonizing the metabolism. If you take people who are on that for other reason, they have diabetes actually. So it's not necessary. You can target a lot of the hallmark of aging without target metabolism. There's another example. There is a drug that is on a family called TZDs that are insulin sensitizers, so they're good for metabolism, but their use actually induce heart attacks and osteoporosis and other things. So it's not, so we're talking about drugs that touch a lot of hallmarks, but not necessarily all of them. So we have for diabetes and those who cross diabetes. It's
correct. Yeah.
It's a great point. And Rafa, I want to stay with you for one more question because you really specialize in that kind of aspect of translation. And I've been covering health for a long time. Cover Alzheimer's, one of my other main beats, and we have a real problem in health that so many things have worked in a mouse. We can extend the lifespan of a mouse, a worm, a fly by 30%. We've cured Alzheimer's dozens of times. And yet I think it's in like 90% of drugs fail to actually then show any real efficacy in humans. So why is that? Why is it so much easier to make a mouse live longer than a human?
I mean, so for once, the experimental conditions are extremely well controlled, and we understand very well how to make an animal live longer. But I also want to point out something, that if you look at the lifespan of a black 6 mouse in the 1950s, it was half of what they live now, even in the Jackson laboratories. If you look at the lifespan of humans, we've been able to extend the lifespan of humans through, better water, antibiotics, et cetera, et cetera. So we are improving health and survival in all species. In a mouse, typically you have a homogeneous genetic background. You are eating the same food throughout your whole entire life, and it's quite easy to manipulate the conditions to optimize outcomes. In a human, in a free living human, besides the genetic, your genetic portfolio, if you want to call it something, plus the changing environment and nutrition, I think that this is a lot more complex. Also, if you look at the lifespan of a human is, close to 100 years. In a mouse is just 3 years. So the sequence of events and the ability of the organism to adapt to change is much, much quicker in a mouse than is in a human. The reservoir of tools is much greater in a human than in a mouse. So the manipulation of these are quite distinct. I think that we're learning through expanding our tools in the mouse world by using diverse genetic backgrounds and adapting the housing conditions to more normal housing conditions. I think that we will be able to make some of the drugs a lot more translatable. I think that we need first to understand better how to employ the mouse to represent better a human. We have done really well about understanding the biology of aging of the mouse, and now we need to use it as a tool for human studies. And I think that is progressing in the right direction. I think that in the next 5 to 10 years, there's lots of studies emerging that are making the mouse studies represent much more the physiology of the humans that we do right now.
So staying on that point, how will we know that a drug works in humans? We can't do the same type of lifespan extension, waiting for the mouse to die, waiting for the human to die. We can't really do that yet in humans. So what are you all looking for in terms of how to assess success in a drug, in a gerotherapeutic? Maybe Carolina, we'll start with you.
Yes, for sure. Well, we're very happy to report that we have several studies that we're about to publish, but we have already put in abstracts in research, diabetes, endocrinology meetings. And it is very interesting that older Americans that have heart failure improve significantly again with SGLT2 inhibitors and ketones, which also validates the possibility of the theory of the improvement or the recruitment or refueling of the mitochondria, but also the ability of the skeletal muscle, the heart muscle, to produce more ATP. We have shown that already with phosphorus production. So I think there's a great future for these drugs in older Americans. And you guys mentioned other drugs, but I completely agree. Medications like rapamycin wouldn't be a medication that I would like to give clinically to a patient. And there are medications that go in the wrong direction of metabolism, causing insulin resistance and other complications. But we have seen drugs, at least in the area of diabetes, that seems that are doing great things for our patients. We also have GLP-1 receptor agonists that help them with their weight. They increase inflammation, oxidation, stabilization of the plaque, decrease those oxidated LDL cells that create that plaque, decrease metalloproteinases, which makes that plaque more stable, decreasing heart attacks and strokes, which is more common in the population after 60. So I think the future is bright, at least on anti-diabetic medications and metabolism for our older patients.
I know that one area that is kind of popular right now are these biological age tests. Nir, you kind of touched on this in your presentation. Are these biomarkers of aging, are they another way to target and assess a drug success?
Yeah, I just want to finish the SGLT2 story, because for the SGLT2, there are very big clinical studies that started in people with diabetes and noticed that those drugs prevent also heart disease and kidney disease and some other things. And so then there are studies of people who have kidney disease, and they showed that it prevents diabetes and prevents heart disease. And then there are studies on people with heart disease that shows that it's not only good for heart disease, it also prevents other disease. In other words, the SGLT2 inhibitors that you give to animals and they live longer are actually showed everything there's need to show here. But of course, to do those studies is a huge amount of money. And the thing that is needed for us most of all is biomarkers. Just like you have cholesterol and you know that cholesterol is a risk and you'll lower the cholesterol and you'll have a heart attack, we need those biomarkers for aging. And we're making a lot of progress. We are, I'll just tell you this progress for me. I measured 10 of my biomarkers and I'm anywhere between 20 years younger than my age to 4 years older than my age. So they're not perfect. They're interesting, but they're not perfect. But with AFAR, we're leading a study that's called FAST. You're welcome to see it because it's moving. It's probably moving on to ARPA-H, where we're going to take studies that have been done on SGLT2 and GLP-1, on metformin, on lifestyle. And we're going to see, to measure lots of biomarkers, $15 million worth of biomarkers, and show not only which biomarker, how the biomarkers tell us what's our biological age, but which of them are changing. And those that are changing are important for us individuals to know that if we started exercising or take metformin, we're getting younger. And for Kristen and her company is to see in a phase 2 study that we're actually going on the right direction with those biomarkers. So this is a crucial development that's really happening very fast.
I want to stay with this issue of how to assess success. And this, Carolina, you mentioned some clinical studies. I'm curious to hear from you, Sara. Will we ever have one of those, kind of quote unquote gold standard, double blind, placebo control, multi-decade, longitudinal studies? Nir, like you said, like we've looked at kind of the consequences of these studies, for a particular disease. Will we ever have one that's just targeting aging? Can we ever do that study that we've done in a mouse and actually show in a human that it's extending lifespan?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm not going to say never, but I think it is difficult because you need to have a very long-term study. And we're talking about diseases and conditions like frailty, which is my focus, which take a while to develop. So I think it's very key that we have studies that are long-term treatment. In other words, 18, 24 months of treatment, as opposed to, 6 months, which sometimes we kind of necessarily have to do because of costs, et cetera, and those constraints. There are longer term studies being done now. For example, there's a long-term trial of metformin going on right now for dementia of Alzheimer's type. Dr. Jose Lutzinger at Columbia University is leading that multi-site trial. And so there are studies going on now. We just are, we're waiting for the results. So I think to show that they are quote unquote working, we need to see that there's a delay in an age-related disease and or a delay in geriatric syndromes such as frailty or disability related to that disease, or all cause say mortality free of or survival free of disability and frailty and multimorbidity, so to speak. But that's a little bit more difficult, I think, than sort of disease focus, which I think is a lot of what we're doing now, which I think is a good start. And then lastly, I will say that there's not going to be, in my opinion, a one size fits all. There will be we will over time probably identify phenotypes of individuals that would be more appropriate for some drugs versus others. So yeah, that's the other thing I wanted to mention.
Kristen, I see you nodding, and I know that you're coming at this from a slightly different perspective, running a company instead of a lab at a research university. I'm curious, how are you testing for success in the drugs that are in your pipeline?
Yeah, for sure. No, so happy to chat about that. A couple points. First, I think it is important, as has come up, is that pharma does run trials that are kind of close, pretty close to an aging trial today. These are outcome studies, right? So basically they're looking at large numbers of people on their drug for 3, 4, 5 years, asking questions like, are cardiovascular outcomes reduced? And all-cause mortality, which is basically aging, is often a secondary endpoint in these studies. Is it making people live longer? And they're doing these studies because it's well worth their while. These are the data packages that drive label expansion. That's been true for incretins, for GLP-1s, and also for SGLT2, like prevention of cardiovascular disease. And critically, this is what drives reimbursement. The reason why Medicare reimburses for weight loss drugs is because of the cardiovascular risk prevention. So even though these are huge, expensive trials to run, it's worth it. I think we should get to the point where, we're also measuring frailty and reimbursing for frailty, but there's a few other things that have to move in the system. But I think that's a really important example of something where we don't really have a path yet, but need one. But back to your question, early on in the development of a new drug, you're not going to shell out $100 million for a giant trial to be your first trial. So there's two things, right? The biomarkers that we mentioned, they don't have to be an approvable endpoint to be useful. Right. So today, even though we go into and do an obesity study or some study for a particular disease that has an endpoint that's weight loss or something like that, I can still measure aging biomarkers for what I believe is my aging mechanism in human populations. And if it's moving in the right direction, I can gain confidence that the drug is doing what I think it's doing. Right. So biomarkers can still be valuable, I think, even if they're not an approvable endpoint. That said, I would love to see, a surrogate endpoint for aging actually be approved. FDA is reconsidering surrogates for bone, for Alzheimer's. There is, I think, a potential path for aging if we can get aligned on what that biomarker would be, how it's tied to mechanism. So that's a separate discussion, right? But yeah, there is a path today, I think, with that first disease approval and with the usual path of indication expansion and outcomes trials.
I want to stay on that for a second, about the FDA. I know this is a point of controversy, sometimes maybe more external than internal. But the question of whether aging will ever get the designation, from the FDA as a treatable condition or treatable disease. Kristen, do you think that will happen? What do we look for instead? How do you bring a drug to market if that doesn't happen?
Sure. I mean, there's definitely a path already, right? Because many of these therapies that are efficacious for aging are also efficacious for particular diseases where there's already a well-defined regulatory path, a well-defined commercial strategy, right? So you can go that route and you can label expand. That can take a very long time, right? I think statins, it took 20 years from that first approval for familial hypercholesterolemia, like a fairly narrow disease, to be used today as a preventative drug. Like that took 20 years. So we do need to do better than that. I think that along the road to aging, there are some concrete examples like sarcopenia, like frailty, which maybe we understand better today in terms of what a biomarker could be, what that could look like. But I think there's also just been in the past few years more of an openness to surrogate endpoints that I hope will be useful in our field as well.
Nir, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this as well. I know you and I have talked about this in the past, the question of indication from the FDA.
Right. So if you want to see a really great movie of National Geographic that's called The Age of Aging, they went with us to the FDA when we introduced a potential with metformin to make it a gerotherapeutic. And it was a successful, it was a success. The study we might do, we haven't done so far because lots of things happen. But if a company wants to get an indication that's very close to aging, the FDA has already agreed. And actually, the FDA now is showing an extra flexibility. We have several things in parallel that are going through, including what Courtney is doing and her and Lilly and several other pharmaceuticals are doing. I just want to say the following thing. As I introduced to you, I think aging is the mother of diseases. Okay, aging drives those diseases. That doesn't mean that we want to call aging a disease. And the reason is that look what happened during COVID. We basically pushed the elderly into islands. They couldn't see their family. They couldn't see their grandchildren. They don't want to be called sick, and not all of them are sick. American Federation of Aging Research doesn't want to call aging a disease. ARP doesn't want to call aging a disease. But what we found out, and by the way, the FDA doesn't want to call aging a disease, but this is not an obstacle, okay? We still can develop the drug, and with time, everybody will understand, and maybe after this webinar, they'll understand that whatever you call it, we can deal with it.
Speaking of things that are other indications for drugs, I think that what we're talking about here a lot is kind of off-label use. That seems to be a very popular way that people are currently accessing these drugs, and maybe they're on metformin, but they don't have diabetes. Same thing, we know that people are doing this with rapamycin, and then I've reported on. Carolina, you're mentioning SGLT2s. Like, I'm curious, like, what should people be aware of from a safety perspective? Like, we talk about these drugs as if they're pretty influential and there is a lot of excitement about them, but these are very serious medications that can have a lot of side effects. So before someone starts taking this drug or ask their doctor for a prescription for something like this, what should they be aware of from a risk perspective?
Thank you, Dana, so much for the question. That's an excellent question. And we have over 5 years of experience with SGLT2 inhibitors, and we were even involved in the in the phase 3 trials. There's a boatload of information out there that has shown that SGLT2 inhibitors are safe and effective for not only the treatment of diabetes, but also for the treatment, like Dr. Barzilai was mentioning, heart failure with and without diabetes, renal disease with and without diabetes, and really the precautions are minimal. So if you have uncontrolled diabetes, you can have genital infections. So that's something to be on the lookout. And it really gets resolved with a one-time tablet of medication. We see it with certain frequencies, about 5% of the population in general. So we only advise our patients to give us a call when they have early symptoms and not let the symptoms get worse. There's a very small amount of patients that have issues with volume. We know that our older patients are more sensitive to volume changes. So we recommend them to stay well hydrated when they take their medication. And we also adjust some of their diuretics if they're on SGLT2 inhibitors. Really severe side effects that only present in less than 1% of the population, like something called euglycemic DKA, that can cause an admission to the hospital, are seen very rarely, mostly in patients either with type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes. They're in multiple doses of multiple doses a day of insulin. And on those patients, we need to be a little bit more careful. But we're talking about the other 95% of the population that can take this medication very safely. And there are long-term studies that have shown that safety and efficacy as long as pleiotropic effects, like the benefits to the heart and the kidneys.
Sara, I know that you're also working with older adults. What do you advise them if any of them are asking you, can I take something off label that might extend my longevity or extend my lifespan? How do you counsel them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in fact, I think that's a big area that we need to grow in the future going forward, is to train practitioners to be able to weigh the potential benefit versus risk of any of these interventions that we're discussing. So yeah, I mean, it's really kind of taking into account the whole picture of the patient and whether this intervention would be good or not based on their past medical history, their other impairments. The drug that I have the most experience with is metformin. We just completed a relatively small clinical trial of metformin for frailty prevention, and we're wrapping up the results now and hoping to submit that for publication very soon. But I would say we focused in that trial specifically on older adults with pre-diabetes, oral glucose intolerance, which is a kind of an indication sort of for metformin already for diabetes prevention. And I can tell you that it was very well tolerated in this population, 65 and older. No serious adverse events. And, some patients do have GI, gastrointestinal symptoms or side effects, but we had very few patients that could not tolerate the medication. But with metformin, you do have to make sure that patients have regular renal function. So that's something to keep in mind if anybody's asking about metformin usage.
I'm going to ask a little bit of a step back question, and maybe I should have started the conversation with this question, but I'm going to ask it now anyway. Who should be taking these drugs? We're talking this as a really, everyone is going to get older. Is this something that everyone should be looking into? Should everyone be asking their doctor about a gerotherapeutic? Who might benefit the most from these drugs? Who should definitely not take them? I'm really curious kind of to level set a little bit on who this could actually benefit versus who it could potentially harm. Nir, do you want to start off?
Yeah. So first of all, let me just really stress that any drug that is FDA approved, it's legal to use for anything else. Okay, nobody is going to get into trouble. So it's more of us really training the doctors or talking with the doctors about it. But there's no excuse of going to the doctor and saying, what about if I take metformin, and the doctor has to be defensive and say why yes and why not. And I think it's possible. But I really want to say that, and we're also in a committee. We're trying to take all those 4 drugs and say, okay, if you have a patient, which drug should he take? Which drug should he take first? Should he take drugs with combination? And I think this is something that we can start suggesting, but the practice will help us do that. But I want to really make my answer wider in the sense that we're not talking only on older adults. People who survive cancer, you know, kids where we treat them with chemotherapy and radiation, they get heart attacks when they're in their 30s. Women with breast cancer that get this treatment are in bad shape after the therapy. They need help. People who have HIV get diseases 10 years ahead of their cohort. They need help. People who are disabled and they cannot move and they eat more, they need help. People with Down syndrome. Down syndrome is an aging disease. They need help. You know, for agriculture, there's an interest to use the biology of aging to determine the life shelf of vegetables and fruits. And certainly, if we're going to space, if we want to go to Mars, we have to solve aging first, because we'll never get there without disease, with cosmic radiation, and we're not coming back. So the reason we are discussing that and doing that, and we want to practice that, it's because important not only for aging, it's important for the rest of the world.
I think we've heard about a lot of kind of exciting research that you all are doing. I think there is a lot of promise in this space. But, you know, I have to put on kind of my skeptic journalist hat. Like, we don't have anything yet that we know can reverse aging, or really it's been shown in that kind of large clinical trial to slow down aging. But one question I get from, you know, readers all the time is about lifestyle interventions. You know, I think that's actually where we have some of the best evidence, is just the things that everyone knows that we should be doing, you know, eating a healthy diet, exercising, sleeping well, those types of things. So I'm curious to kind of throw this out to the whole panel again. Like, how do these types of interventions, you know, the gerotherapeutic drugs that we're talking about, how do they compare with just things like diet and exercise? You know, is there a need for these drugs if people just kind of adhere to the guidelines that we have, and maybe we all do what we know we should be doing anyway? Rafa, we haven't heard from you, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, especially given all the intermittent fasting work you've done.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. For intermittent fasting, there's, you know, clear evidence in the clinic now. There's lots of clinical trials being done, properly done, where large number of individuals have been on different paradigms of intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating, or 40% calorie restriction, even trials that have lasted for 2 years that have clearly demonstrated that there is a benefit, a cardiometabolic health that we have been talking about during the whole time. There are some side effects, for example, you know, a decrease on bone mass that you need to take into consideration. But overall, I think that, you know, lifestyle interventions are complicated and complex. People just don't do them. I mean, we know that, you know, being fat is bad for you. How many people can go into a diet and remain thin for the rest of their life once they have become obese? It's very extremely complicated. I think popping in a pill or putting an injection every week is much easier to achieve that health. To me, the one thing that we have not mentioned, and I think that is super important, is that aging is a very personal issue. It is that each one of us goes through the aging process in a very, very peculiar way. We have different genes, we have different backgrounds, and it's super important to understand what are your patterns of change in your health parameters, to be able to understand what would be potentially beneficial, you know, intervention for you. Some people have low-grade inflammation. Some people have a slightly high sugar. So those are completely different outcomes in terms of long-term prevention of how to target these things. Most of the biomarkers that we've been studying are population studies. And in the general public, you know, you see changes on fat mass that go up with age, but not everybody goes up with age in fat mass. So it's very important to have the guidance and understanding of what are your, you know, long-term changes in the different physiological parameters that will lead to disease or potentially a disease that you need to have in order to make those kind of decisions. So longitudinal studies of aging, trying to understand the progression of those physiological changes are crucial. I don't think that anyone can, I mean, and Nir probably will argue with me about this, but you can go right now and get a methylation clock done on you, and I can tell you that you are like 5-10 years above and beyond your chronological age, but nobody really knows because you don't have a time span of what that methylation has done over the last 10 years. in the population, compared to the population, yes, you can place yourself, but on your own, you don't know what type of trajectory you are heading. We know with methylation clocks, for example, if you intervene, that they do change. You know, if you have an infection, they change. If you start exercising and lose weight and you take anti-hypertensive drug, they change. So we know that they're sensitive, but we need to know how that sensitivity applies to you and what would be, you know, the proper treatment or the proper guidance to provide someone that want to go in the proper direction.
Carolina, I would love to hear from you next.
I just thank you just to compliment Rafa's comment that I think it was brilliant. A couple of things. One, yes, we do want to reverse aging, and I think that would be fabulous and get an FDA approval. However, we also need to think that people, older Americans, have multiple already established chronic degenerative diseases. So in part, one way of decreasing that inflammation and oxidation is providing these approved medications for those particular chronic diseases. Now, the other comment is that we do have unpublished data that we did with Dr. Espinoza at the Health Science Center that shows that older Americans, both overweight, both with prediabetes, one treated only with lifestyle and exercise, and the other one only treated with an SGLT2 inhibitor, they both were matched for age, for weight loss, and they both had the same degree of inflammation and oxidation corroborated by fat biopsies that were stained with something called XGAL that shows senescence or aging. And very significantly, we show that the patients that received the medication had a significant decrease in senescence, which tells us that patients with obesity, which is a chronic inflammatory disease, with prediabetes, which is a chronic inflammatory disease, and they're both are directly associated with cardiovascular events, do not decrease their inflammation just by diet and exercise. You need an additional intervention. So yes, absolutely, all chronic diseases, and I want to leave that clear, need lifestyle intervention because we need to change as many habits as we can. And I'm going to include smoking there, which is extremely inflammatory. But medications do help to really make a difference on top of lifestyle and exercise.
Kristen, I'd love to hear how you all are thinking about this at BioAGE and if you're incorporating that into your own testing of different drugs.
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, I mean, exercise is probably my favorite longevity intervention. It's just so much evidence that it works, right? And it's a great proof point that you can go into an older population, do something, and it works, right? So there's at least one thing that works that we know of. Like even strength training regimes that, you know, older people are trying for the very first time can have substantial impacts. However, and this has come up, right? An 80-year-old is not physically able to have the same like strength and cardio regime as a 30-year-old. It's not possible. And furthermore, for lots of these exercise pathways, the biology, it also changes with aging, right? So what about them? So at BioAGE, we actually really like exercise as an inspiration for new therapies. I mean, if you think about it, if you exercise, you go on, you know, calorie restriction, any one of these interventions, some magic in your body happens, and some biology happens, and that has these positive effects. So, for example, we're working on a collaboration with Novartis, where the goal is to find new targets, so new molecular targets that help mimic the effects of exercise, which can be used more broadly by other populations, where you're not necessarily able to because you're already frail, et cetera.
And so Carolina mentioned, research that you two are working on together. Is there anything else that you want to add in terms of, kind of additional benefits of medications on top of these lifestyle interventions?
I think I would just echo what others have said. And also, I'm a geriatrician, so I commonly deal with older patients with multimorbidity and counsel on the importance of exercise. And, sometimes it is difficult. It's just not easy for patients to achieve even the recommended, exercise goals for adults in the US. So, I mean, we do know that any amount of physical activity is better than being sedentary, but there are barriers to everyone achieving those results and weight loss, as Rafa said. So I think exploring these other interventions is a way to kind of mimic the effects of exercise or provide additional benefit, maybe above and beyond exercise.
Great. Well, we are almost at 4 o'clock. We've taken up almost exactly an hour here, but I have a couple questions from the audience that I want to throw out, and maybe we could just do a popcorn round. Whoever wants to answer, feel free to jump in. I have to confess, these are both topics that I am personally fascinated by, so I'm curious to hear the panelists' responses. The first is on whether any of the drugs that have been mentioned today can be used for Alzheimer's or dementia. That really seems to be kind of the ultimate challenge when it comes to preventing or improving a different condition. So yeah, I'm curious, like, are any of these drugs, is there good evidence that they might be efficacious when it comes to preventing or treating Alzheimer's disease and other dementias?
Kristen, maybe you know more about GLP-1 than most of us.
Well, there's big trials going on right now, right? Novo has a big Alzheimer's prevention trial. There's a lot of promise in the mechanism. There should be definitive data soon, but it looks like it could work. We will wait for the data set before we know for sure, but that would be really exciting given they're fairly safe, fairly well tolerated drugs, and it's a disease where we've had so few things work so far.
And in the literature, there's a fight between which is better, GLP-1 or SGLT2. So Carolina.
Thank you so much, Nir, and you're absolutely right. The thing is that GLP-1s and SGLT2s, they both have very different mechanisms of action. Actually, their combination is complementary. So as Kristen said, there are multiple clinical trials, very large clinical trials being done with both drugs to see the effects on neurocognitive disease and particularly Alzheimer's. We have a brain institute here now, and they're heavily working on that, and we're collaborating with them. So the future will tell, but I am very optimistic about positive results.
I just wanted to add, I mentioned the metformin trial, but there's also a very large multi-site trial going on right now called Preventable, and it's with atorvastatin, and it's being led by Karen Alexander from Duke University, and that trial is looking at the prevention of dementia and disability in healthy older adults, basically who don't have an indication for a statin. And so, that's ongoing. So lots of trials ongoing.
And then the second question I want to throw out to you all is, Nir, you mentioned supplements at the beginning in your slides. I have to promote my own article. I just had a story about 2 weeks ago on supplements for aging. So I'm really curious, they're pushed so heavily by so many influencers. Things like NAD, urolithin A do seem to have, in preclinical studies, there's some evidence. It's, very interesting. What does the data in humans actually say? Is there any supplement that is being hawked for longevity that may actually be efficacious?
Well, I think the major thing about nutraceutical is that they are good for the economy. Otherwise, we cannot really answer your question. But I'll give you an example. Mars Candy Bar, right? The chocolate bar. They did a study with 20,000 people for 3.5 years, average follow-up 3.6 years, where they gave half of the people the chocolate powder, the flavonoid, and the others a powder that tasted great but didn't have the flavonoid. And they showed that there's a decrease actually in mortality. Okay? So here you see somebody's trying to do a good study and show that something that we can eat is good for you. But by the way, there are 12 studies where they haven't shown any other benefit, but more important, the FDA is not going to allow them to write on their packages, this is a longevity drug, okay? I think what we need to think and what the academy is thinking of how we get the FDA to approve differently nutraceutical that had some clinical studies with outcome that were statistically significant versus what they claim they could do. And this will take a while, but I think what I'm calling for the public is when you have clinical studies, when you have a drug and you have a control and there's outcomes and they're statistically significant, you can believe that. But everything else is just hope and can be dangerous.
Can I add one thing real quick? I mean, in order to supplement something, do you really know that you are deficient on it? I mean, you know, you want to supplement vitamin C or vitamin E. Do you really need it? I mean, you can test whether you need it or not. So to me, taking supplements just for the heck of it, I think is not a great advice.
Carolina, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just a brief comment. Here as an academic institution, we also cover the hospital, and we have seen several hospitalizations with important complications, especially with older adults, sometimes particularly women, that just take several supplements that are sold over the counter, and that can translate into certain organ failure, like liver failure, and they up in the intensive care unit. So we usually in our clinic advise the community not to just randomly choose supplements that they might see in social media, etc., that are trendy. Because there's not a lot of data on them. There's some neurologists that like to explore certain levels of vitamin D and certain neurocognitive diseases, for example. However, all these medications in excess can be toxic. There is such a thing as vitamin D toxicity, and so they need to be monitored by a provider.
Great. I think really important points there of, warning caution when it comes to supplements. And I just want to throw out one last question for you all. I think that the world of aging research is kind of interesting in terms of the public and private and kind of university partnerships. I think there's a lot more going on that's really exciting, and some of the small startups like BioAGE that Kristen, you're leading. I suppose, like, how are you all looking to work together? And when it comes to some of the obstacles, particularly for getting an aging or a gerotherapeutic drug to the market, if you could kind of wave a magic wand, like what would you see in trials to come? What are you hoping for in studies or partnerships between you all that might get us something a little bit faster?
Kristen.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, what was the first part of the question again?
I mean, I suppose this part's more of a comment than a question, but I do think that, covering this field, I think that some of the startups that are looking at aging are, there seems to be a lot of complementary work between the startups and the universities. More so than I've seen in other health industries where it's, the huge pharma companies and then universities. Aging, there seems to be a lot of kind of go between, a lot of respect between kind of the academia and the startup world. So I'm just kind of curious of how you all are working together and how that might kind of further a drug along to get something to market.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think that is fairly unique, and it's partly because this is new, right? Like, there are aging mechanisms being tested in the clinic today, which was many more so than were tested like 10 years ago. So these sort of this new crop of companies like BioAGE that is really focused on aging mechanisms and taking them to trials. It's coming from the science, right? It's coming from labs. So I think that is a lot more important. And just to be very specific about what we do at BioAGE, we have a lot of academic collaborations, usually on the biology of our targets, right? We're working on targets like the inflammasome, NLRP3, apelin as an exercise mimetic. These are really complex biologies. We're still mapping out everything they can do in different models. So we love to collaborate with target experts in academia to figure out what's going on. Even some of the data sets that really power our platform, like human aging studies over time, we're really taking advantage of some of the work of academics that have collected these large biobanks over the years. So there's really a lot of opportunity for overlap there. Go ahead, Nir. Yeah.
No, finish.
I was going to shift topics to the magic wand perspective. I mean, partly, like, I would love to see us converge on some interesting biomarkers, just for the fact that clinical experiments are incredibly expensive, right? There's all these promising mechanisms, and very few are advanced to the clinical stage because that human data set, that first de-risking human data set that justifies further investment in your new drug is incredibly expensive. So you'd love to have some surrogates that you could look at and really believe. And I think there are initiatives that are going to move the needle there. I forgot to mention this earlier, but I think XPRIZE is a great example. There's going to be a large number of therapies in humans. We'll be measuring the same biomarkers in the same ways, and that'll be a data set that will help teach us which of these may be reliable in future. So I think that, you know, lowering the cost basically to get that first human aging signal is going to be really helpful for the field.
And I would just add, I'm also an executive on the Longevity Biotech Association. So this is by invitation for companies like Kristen that are totally devoted to the biology of aging and trying to find a way forward. And we have this thing that it's, you know, what is the special problems for us that we have to solve as a community, whether it's FDA indication, whether it's which biomarkers we're using. So that's another collaboration within the industry to get the idea of everyone and move the field forward.
Great. Well, we are over time as it is. Rafa, I know you have a flight to catch, so I'm going to cut it short there. Thank you all so much for your expertise and time. It's been a really fascinating discussion. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. It was fascinating.
Thank you, everyone, for the invitation.
And on behalf of our hosts, the American Federation for Aging Research and the Academy for Health and Lifespan Research, we want to thank Dana Smith for her expert moderation, and of course, all the panelists' deep expertise and knowledge, and for sharing that with us this afternoon. For folks who would like to who perhaps had to step away for a moment or two, we will be, or would like to watch the recording again, we will be sharing the recording through a variety of methods and mechanisms. Next slide, we will be also coming back to you on Tuesday, October 21st, from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern, with a free webinar building on some of the topics we talked about today: the potential of geroscience, from economic gains to social returns and ethical concerns. This will include AFAR experts in conversation with the Boston Globe's Brian Bergstein. We hope you'll stay connected with us on social media and follow AFAR there. And finally, we hope if you are able that perhaps you can make a donation to help AFAR, the American Federation for Aging Research, continue to offer these no-cost webinars, and that helps AFAR support aging research. You can see the link there. And again, thank you on behalf of AFAR and the Academy for everyone's time and attention today. We look forward to seeing you next time.